everyone, welcome back to my RC channel. This video we're going to be covering shock maintenance, as I'd previously said. Before I get into the video, I'm just going to go on about how often you should do this. Now, it really depends on the surface you're racing. If I'm racing on grass or I'm racing on sandy astroturf, I would replace my shock seals and do this maintenance every time I've raced. If you're on carpet and so on, there's ways to feel how the shocks are and when they need done, but I will cover that in the video. So without further ado, let's get on. So first of all, just very straightforward, disassembling your shocks. You'll have done this several times before. Obviously take the bleeder screw out, undo the cap, and we're just going to get them empty of oil. Once you've done that, just repeat for all your shocks. I'm not going to make you watch this, we'll just skip forward through the next ones. One quick thing I'd like to cover while this is ongoing is, I did try and show it in the video but it didn't come out very well, so I didn't put it into the edit, is to check how your shock O-rings feel. Once the shock is empty, you just move the shock shaft in and out and you can basically feel if an O-ring is swollen. You want a slight, you're obviously going to feel a slight bit of resistance from an O-ring, but if it feels quite stiff, like there's oil in the shock when there's not, you know they've swollen, and that's when there's time to change them out. So now that I've done this, I'm just checking all the caps are okay, just making sure everything looks okay, just giving everything a once over. Just giving everything a little spray with brake cleaner just to clean off any excess oil that's left over on the top of the caps from cleaning them out. Next thing we're going to use is our shock shaft pliers. I would recommend them. Now you might see here I'm spraying some brake cleaner onto the sort of nylon part. The reason for this is sometimes when the shock end is tight, you can't get it off very easily, the shaft will spin in the tool. A little bit of brake cleaner just for some reason cleans any crap off the shaft and it just makes the tool grip better. Now if you don't have shock shaft pliers, you can use other things such as normal pliers. However, please either put a bit of like blue roll around the shaft so that you don't score it, or you can also use pair of pliers on the flat part of the shock shaft. You do not want to score the shock shaft. That is really important. That will cause resistance through the O-ring and it will cause damage. Be very careful with the shock shafts. So as you can see, I skipped through the next part as you don't need me to let you watch me undoing 4 shock shafts. So now it's just a case of getting them empty, getting all the old O-rings out, giving everything a clean up. Okay, on this shock body there's something I do that I would not recommend. I can't get the shim out properly, so I turn the shock body over here and I push it out from inside. Now, try not to do that. The reason for that is if you score any part of the inside of that shock body, you'll also create resistance for the piston. You do not want to be putting anything like that inside the shock body unless you really have to. If you do have to do it the way I just done it, be very careful not to score it. Try to get it out from the bottom first. This car was a friend's car and it had just been raced on carpet for the winter, so as you can see, That's some carpet that I'd found inside the shock, the lower cap. So the lower cap for the shock body inside the O-ring part. And this is why we do our shock maintenance. Any carpet that gets built up in this area is going to cause resistance, so it's going to cause inconsistencies. As you can see, also on the O-ring, a little bit of carpet, not too much, not a vast amount, nothing too bad, but this is why we do the maintenance. Now on to the fourth shock, and this was the worst one, as you'll see, for having quite a bit of carpet in it. And I wanted to show it on the camera for a good example. So as you can see, that's just the carpet that's around the O-ring. That is quite a lot. That's going to be causing a fair bit of resistance on the shock shaft. And I then put it onto the driver so you can see just how much was on that. That's quite a lot. Once you've got the shocks disassembled, I like to give the shims a bit of a clean, and also the plastic seals from the bottom shock cap. Just remember the black ones on the Schumacher have a lip on them where they fit into the cap, so just make sure that you get them all clean. Just a bit of brake cleaner over the top, just rub them clean. So now we're just going to move on to the bottom of the shock body, use a cotton bud, just run it around the inside, just get any dirt or leftover stuff that's left in there. Sometimes like the slime or the oil or whatever you've used on the O-rings will be left over. So it's just good to get the excess out just for a thorough clean. Moving on, we're going to put some new O-rings in, so U4110 Schumacher O-rings, kit part is what I use. You do have optional pro seals, but I don't like them, so I use the kit part. And I want to share with you a little tip how I do this as well. I cut the bag, as you can see, just the corner, all the O-rings, and then I like to use associated green slime for this part. I'll tell you why I use this after I show you this part, but just put a little bit into the bag. Now as you can see, that's just a small amount in the bag, and then we're just going to mix the O-rings about and just get them all covered in it. It's a much cleaner way to do it, you don't waste anymore. But like I was saying about the O-rings, you have the standard ones and the pro ones. I find that the Pro ones can leak a little bit of oil, they don't have as tight a fit, and I don't see any problem with using the standard ones. They don't cause any extra friction that you don't want, they're just a nice fit. By all means try out the Pro ones yourself though, see if you prefer them. And there you go, that's how they come out once you've done that. All covered. So next, just put the O-rings in, each shock. And then we just repeat this for all the shocks, then the middle shim, and then another layer of O-rings. Okay, so now it's time to fit the lower shock cap back on that houses the O-rings. Now leave about maybe a ½ mm gap. Do not tighten it fully, as you can see on the camera here. Leave a small gap and I'll come to that in a couple of minutes. Okay, so for the next part as well, I like to use a pair of verniers to measure out my shocks correctly. It's good to have equal shocks. These are just the cheapy version I use, I think they're from Amazon, probably about £6. They work perfect. So the reason for leaving the shock loose, you're going to put it through and you're going to turn it while you're doing it so that you don't damage the O-rings. Also, see as there's a little bit of slime left on the end? Use that as a lubrication on the threads. If you'd fully tightened down the lower shock cap, it would have been harder to put that through. So once it's put through, tighten the shock cap up. This will save any damage to your O-rings. When the shock cap at the bottom is fully tight, it just makes everything a tighter fit and causes more resistance when you're doing this part. So leave it slightly loose. Once the shock shaft's in, tighten it back up. You will definitely save damaging your O-rings. Not to say you will damage them by doing them fully tight, but it's just easier to do it this way. So once that's on, I like to measure them. I run on this car that I was building them for 22mm fronts and 28.5 rears. So as you can see, it was slightly out, so a small adjustment. Check it again. And I think the reading there is 22.02. That is close enough. So once I've done that part, I get my shock stand. And we're going to fill the shocks. Now, I think it was 550 in the front of this car. So you're going to fill it up maybe 3/4, not all the way to the top. You're going to work the shock shaft, and also you're going to turn it while you're working the shock shaft just to release any air bubbles, as you can see coming up there. Just work it, turn it a few times. Once you've done that, you're just going to sit it back into the shock stand and just let it settle. And then you repeat the process for the next 3 shocks. Okay, so we've got them all done, so now we're going to finish them off. So the first shock we started with, it's been sitting the longest, we top that up. just slightly over level, a little bit of a dome on top. We're going to fit the shock cap back on. Apologies with the camera work on this one, it was slightly above the camera for some of this. I'll improve this as the videos go on. So then I'm just going to take a bit of blue roll, bleed the shock. And this is probably where I do it slightly differently to some people. So I'm going to get the bleeder screw. I'm going to put that back in the shock. Probably, once I stop dropping it, I'm going to put that about halfway in. Then I'm going to work the shock shaft to displace any air. Just move that up and down a few times. Bleeder screw back out, and we're going to bleed again. So I always double bleed my shocks. Now this isn't necessary on all shocks I've used, but on these current shocks I find it necessary. As an experiment, next time you do your shocks, put the bleed screw back in after the first bleed, pump the shock up and down as I just did, then try and fully compress the shock. I'll be surprised if you don't have an airlock at the top of your shock. All the second bleed does is displace any air that's still there and gets rid of it locking at the top so that the shock shaft can be fully compressed. Once I've done that, I just like a bit of brake cleaner on top and just rub off any excess oil to keep the shocks clean so that it doesn't pick up a lot of dirt. Also any sand if you're on an AstroTurf track. It's obviously going to pick up dirt, but the more that you can stop this, the better. Or limit it, should I say. And then we just repeat the process for the rest of the shocks. That's the end of my shock tutorial, guys. I've got a few more videos coming up. I've got a few planned. I just want to say that one of the next ones I've got planned is something that I found a little bit confusing when I first took up the hobby, although it seems like something simple, and that is how to acetone your tyres. What to use, where to get the acetone, how to go about it. There was nothing really available when I took up the hobby, and it was a little bit confusing about what to do, so I'm going to cover that. I'm going to cover ball diff maintenance, and I'll also be covering soldering very soon. If there's anything else you'd like to see, please put it below in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot.